a.m. April 12th. This regular scheduled meeting of the Arizona Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is called to order. Roll call, please. On the phone,
Dale Nations,
Frank Thorwald,
Bill Feierabend,
Stephen Cooper.
We have a quorum. The meeting starts. Is there any conflicts of interest? Hearing none, we move on to the discussion and consideration and possible vote of the minutes for March 1st, 2019, the public meeting. Is there any discussion on that? Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
A separate motion for each, please.
Yes, that's what I'm asking for March 1st
Thank you.
for the public meeting.
I move we approve the minutes for the March 1 public meeting.
I second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the March 1st minutes are approved. The March 8th, 2019 emergency meeting minutes. Is there any discussion on those? Any comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I move we approve the March 8th emergency meeting minutes.
I second that. Everyone in favor say aye.
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 Any abstentions? None. Hearing none, the motion carries. The minutes for the March 8th, 2019 emergency meeting are approved. Item 3, Ranger Development. Dennis, would you give us a quick summary of the Ranger Development?
Ranger has had quite a bit of activity out there in southern Navajo and Apache counties over the past 3 years or so. They've acquired wells, re-entered some plugged abandoned wells, drilled many new wells. They're in various stages of their lives. These wells are. Some have just recently been drilled. Some were permitted as far back as the autumn of 2015. Many have been on production and are now declining to the point where they need to be taken at least temporarily off of production. What I provided on the screen here was a table, to the best of my knowledge, of the status that Ranger comes before us today to request approval of. They need temporary abandonment status on at least 3 wells, and they need shut-in status on 6 or 7 wells. The commission has approved shut-in status for a couple other wells. That's down at the bottom of the table on the left. The only other 2 wells that we're not going to discuss at all today are 2 wells that have expired, but just for the complete record, I put it on the agenda there. And then there's 4 other wells that I'm a little bit confused as exactly what Ranger is seeking, so I will let Tony explain that. And there's a second part to this discussion, but I think I'll wait until we go through the temporary abandonment shut-in discussions. So at this point, the only other thing I want to point out to the commissioners is that I had provided a copy of a table summary report that Dr. Nations requested. I call your attention, and I don't know if I gave a copy to everybody. Did Bill Feierabend and Steve Cooper both get copies of this?
Yes, we
Yes.
received an email.
Okay. Frank, did I give you a copy?
You do. I have it.
Maybe you don't.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
Anyway, what I handed out in the sheet of paper, the front and the back, is Tony's well report to satisfy the request that Dr. Nations made on March 8th. I added a summary at the end there that's kind of color-coded that just illustrates the fact that Ranger has gotten a little behind in their reporting. The rules say that if a well is ceases activity at a well for 60 days or more, the operator has to take action to do something, starting either with plug and abandonment or at least come to the commission and request shut-in status, temporary abandonment status, and so on and so forth. And what I tried to portray in this table is that there are some wells that have exceeded the 60 days where I did not get the reporting in time, and a number of wells that are under the 60 days. And then the color coding should be self-explanatory, basically, that the gray blue stuff is what needs shut-in status, and that there's 3 wells that need temporary abandonment status. And then, like on the previous table, there's 4 wells that I'm not sure what we're doing with. But at this point, I've turned it over to Tony Hines of Ranger Development.
Okay. Yep. For the record, Tony Hines with Ranger Development. I'm the project manager for Ranger Development LLC. First well on the list in the agenda is the Hortenstein 35-1 request for temporary abandonment. We took over this well back in March. I believe it was approved March 2017 from a previous operator. The well had been left shut in. We have plans to recomplete the well in the Shinnerup zone. The well was drilled down to the Coconino. It has not been plugged back yet. We took over the operatorship in March 2017. Our contractor has been busy working on drilling of other wells, working on other wells. We do still plan to do that completion. In review of the records, I did not see where we specifically requested a extension or a status of temporary abandon ourselves. So the request is to give us a temporary abandonment status on that well until we can, such time as we can get in to do the recompletion in the well. We're asking for up to the 5 years for the temporary abandonment.
Any questions?
I have a quick question. Mr. Hines, just so it sits right now, the well was purchased March 16th, 2017. Has Ranger taken any steps to do anything on the well? You haven't rangered it, you haven't done anything?
We haven't touched the well physically. We had originally submitted a sundry notice with a recompletion plan, and we just haven't been able to get to it yet. And I'll get with Dennis to see if I need to resubmit that or not, depending on the time struggle. So.
And the reason that you haven't been able to get to it is just all the available equipment is scheduled on work, and it's just, it comes down to a shortage of equipment almost.
Yeah, it's we have a contractor that we are working with right now who is doing the recompletions and drilling the wells, and he has just been prioritizing other works of the drilling and on some of the other wells, so he just has not been able to get to it at all at this point. So.
That's all for you guys?
Yes.
All that work is okay?
Yes.
These you probably already separate. These are before the 60 days. These are less difficult because they're before the 60 days. These are different.
I have a suggestion. This is Dale.
Go ahead.
Rather than Tony having to go through each and every one of these, it seems to me like his table has given us all the information we need to make decisions on whether we can grant temporary abandonment or shut-in status on each of those 14 wells. So I don't think we need to go through a discussion of each and every one of these because we have all that information. And Dennis, of course, has worked with him and summarized it very nicely. So I think we could assume this information is correct and consider granting the status as appropriate for these groups of wells. It's just my suggestion.
Commissioner Nations, I was just discussing that with legal counsel. I was talking about a consent agenda for some of these items. Council recommended that the ones that were past 60 days we do individually, and the other ones that we could do together. Mr. Zeiss, do you have any?
That's my suggestion, just because in reading the rule, by rule, they had 60 days to either plug and abandon or come back to the board. They haven't, and so for the three, which is the Ranger 35-1 Hornstein, Ram 1-9 Hornstein, and the Ranger 3-1, I would suggest we take those as separate votes because it's on the beyond the 60 days. Farther down, we have three additional wells, the 33-1, the 33-2, and the 28-1. Do those need shut-in status? Or what is the request on those three?
They're in the 33-1, 33-2, and which one?
28-1,
28.
Navajo Springs.
Yep. 28-1 Navajo Springs. It's a little bit different, but they are lumped in with the other producers that need shut-in status.
The reason I ask
Yeah.
is because we're doing temporary abandonment on the top three and shut-in status on the bottom three. And my suggestion is we take the top three, see if anybody has any questions about those three, and do it as one. Because we're asking for temporary abandon, shut-in status, ask for discussion on those three, and vote as a whole. And then after that, we can go back and discuss those before 60 days, because those are before statute. That's my suggestion. Certainly, commissioners, if you would like to handle it differently, that's your decision.
Excuse me, we're actually doing shut-in status on 7 wells up in the list prior to that.
Okay, and the shut-in status, though,
On the
our group
agenda.
of those in the before 60 days. Because
Yes.
before 60 days is different than after 60 days.
Yes.
And that's the reason I'm separating them out.
Yes, I believe they're all within the 60 days on the producing wells, aren't they?
Not my understanding. 33-1 PD, 33-2 PD. Based on my research now, I mean, my memory isn't that good to verify without going to look at it again, but it's been more than 60 days since there's been any activity on those wells. And as far as you reported them to me, you know those wells better than I do. I was a little confused on the 28-1 Navajo Springs. That's why I put SI plus, but I think it's your last activity out there is fairly recent, or like it was February 7th or February 4th or something. It's about 60 days. But what you're doing there is you're waiting on a pipeline to be run to that location.
Right.
That needs shut in anyway.
Right, 28-1.
I lumped it
definitely
into the less than 60 days under that section of the rule that talks about any activity over 60 days or under 60 days,
So-
with the action you have to take. So
Dennis, just so I have my information, the 28-1 Navajo Springs Ranger has been out on that well less than, and has worked on it at any time shorter than 60 days.
well,
I
don't.
request a clarification from Rick.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you're saying we have to, for those that have gone beyond the 60-day expiration, do we have to have a motion for each and every one of those 5 wells?
I
Or
have,
can we?
my suggestion is because those 5 wells, 3 of them are temporary abandoned. My suggestion is we make a motion for those 3 for temporary abandoned. The other, he's looking for shut-in status. We have a separate motion on those 2 wells. One motion, 2 wells, but I'm trying to separate them out based upon days and based upon whether we're going for temporary abandoned or shut-in status. That's my goal.
Okay. I don't want to interrupt the discussion, but I'm ready for a motion on those past 60-day wells.
Mr. Cooper looks interested at the end. I would look forward to his comment.
Just as to the issue, that since we're still in discussion, Mr. Hines, we've got 14 wells here. Do we have any more in the pipeline that have a similar situation?
No.
At a prior meeting, we had called an emergency meeting because this had happened with a competitor of yours. We approved them. Dr. Nations was quite concerned about it, as I was as well. I don't want to belabor the point, to it. It makes us all look bad, including you. And hopefully, in the future, we're not going to be running into a situation like this again. Because from my standpoint, I may revisit how I would vote on the issue today. But I intend to treat you fairly, like I did the competitor that came in late.
Appreciate it.
And my comment, just as legal counsel, is that You probably should review the rule. It's R127125 in regards to activities on wells, if you could, please. I look forward to your interaction with Mr. Turner and keeping your wells up to date from this point forward.
Frank Thorwald, I have a question for you before we proceed with this, how we vote on these things. What was the reasoning for that you were late in getting this material to us? On the temporary abandonments, well, honestly, on all of them, it was not paying attention to that 60-day requirement. And I would ask for some clarification also from the commission what their opinion is on 125A. You know, it says if the operation or production operations at a well are suspended or have been suspended for 60 days, which would imply, you know, it would raise the question about when after the 60 days do you need to come in. Now, obviously, I think it's proven that we should be doing it as soon as we can. We missed that on some of these wells, obviously. But anything, as far as falling within or outside of a 60-day, I'm not sure there's a distinction of why we could or couldn't lump some of these on the shut-in status at least. I understand on the temporary abandon explaining them, but the shut-in status from a potential producer could potentially be considered to still be on the shut-in. With regard to a February versus a March, I mean, it's been more than 60 days, but the wording says or have been suspended, and we had suspended those for a little bit more than 60 days.
Did you submit a sundry notice to the commission letting us know?
No, that's exactly, well, yes, I have, excuse me, I'm sorry, I missed that scene. I did submit a letter asking with us under notice to have these shut in. So.
But that was after 60 days in some cases.
After the 60 days.
Yeah, and certainly, I'm not sure we could give you legal advice today because we've not had an opportunity to research the issue and at least get a consensus of the board members. But my concern would be is that if you don't give us notice, you know, and the clock ticks past 60, you don't get an extra 60 for not giving us notice on it. Had you given us notice timely, then I think that the rule, you know, the rule probably would have worked as it was intended.
And that's my question. How is the rule supposed to work with the wording of or have been suspended? That indicates they've already been suspended for 60 days.
Perhaps it would be better if we have our legal counsel get you a letter basically on how he interprets the rule.
I agree. And the reason I suggest a letter or some other method is we will probably take this up at a subsequent meeting as an executive session, and so that when I provide a legal opinion is with the consent and approval of the board or the commission.
Okay.
Commissioners, how do you want to proceed?
Actually, I have one last comment. To me, the real bottom line is if you're going to take a well out of production and ask for either statuses, that you, at a minimum, you're going to have to probably come before the board. And the reason I suggest that is because I'm assuming if the weather turns in that part of the world, that production may be difficult in winter, and we may want to revisit this, say, in October, November as winter's coming in. If you're going to pull wells out of production, that you come back to the board, at a minimum, talk to Dennis, and we'll see if we need to get you before a board on a vote in a timely manner, rather than coming late. That's my suggestion.
Can I actually have a suggestion for when we actually have questions at the very end for future consideration regarding, you know, what they can and, you know, suggestions about, you know, being able to do that so we don't have to come before the commission on some of these, depending on the conditions. So.
Commissioners, is there any further discussion on how we vote on these items?
Mr. Chair, I'd suggest that you exercise your prerogative as chairman and tee it up the way you want to.
Thank you, Commissioner. My suggestion is we follow council and we look at 35-1, 1-9, and 3-1
I'm ready for a motion. I'm ready with a motion.
Do we need a further explanation on 1-9 and 3-1 since he's only gone through 35-1?
No, I think there's adequate information in this table.
Do I hear a motion then with regard to those three?
I'm ready. I move that the commission grant temporary abandonment status for a period of 5 years from the date of the last activity for the Ranger 35-1 Hortenstein, the Ram 1-9 Hortenstein, the Ranger 3-1 Pentadome.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. With regard to the Ranger, which was the other? The Ranger 33-1 and the Ranger 33-2.
I move that we approve the request for shut-in status extension for 5 years from the date of the last activity for the Ranger 33-1 Pentadome, the Ranger 33-2 Pentadome.
Is there any further discussion on those items?
I just want to make one mention that there's a similar numbered well that has the annotation NS, and make sure in your motion that you clarify that, like Dr. Nation just did. These are Pentadome wells. There's a 33-1, but it's a Navajo Springs well, it says NS, so just for the record. But thanks for clarifying that, Dr. Nations.
I second that Commissioner Nation's motion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries. The next group, Mr. Zeiss.
These are the next.
Sure.
Actually, can I inquire very quickly, Mr. Tony? Before 60 days, I see a group that are marked as shut-in. Is that shut-in status for all of those wells or a part of those wells? And what is the status of the other two that you're requesting? And I'm doing this so we have a clear record whether it's shut-in or temporarily abandoned.
Yeah, actually, I was, and that's what I was trying to point out earlier. Up in the agenda itself, there are 7 wells that are in the agenda are actually grouped together, and they were the producers that are temporarily shut in. They're in a shut-in status, not temporarily abandoned.
And those,
so they're suspended in the agenda.
Is it these 6 right here?
Yeah, those 7.
So we're only dealing with the ones that are less than 60 days. We've already taken care of the 33-1 and 33-2 Pentadomes.
Yes.
Yeah, how I organize
I do have a question for Tony. I don't know if it's appropriate now. What is the intention for the 4 that Dennis shows here that are not colored? I won't read all 4 of them, but why not request temporary abandonment status on those?
I'm not sure what the situation is with those wells. They were included for discussion because I don't know what you're up to.
Okay, which 4 are we talking about?
The 110-A.
Oh, the others. Okay, the others are still in drilling or completion status at this point. We haven't completed works on those and submitted a well completion report. We are currently still performing activities on them and filing sundry notices.
So the 4 on the screen, Tony, they're not colored, are the ones that are all in activity within the past 60 days, so we're not worried about it, but I thought it would be appropriate that you just, like you just said, explain what the status is. So you're still working on those 4 wells that are not colored, the 110A, the 27-1 NS, 33.
Well, we know that you're going to request temporary abandonment status on them or shut-in status. So why don't we just deal with that now?
Dale, this is Rick Zeiss. One of the problems is if he gets that status, he can't touch them anymore until he comes back to the board. And if you're still working on them, then that's up to Tony to answer, Mr. Hines to answer. And that's the effect is if he still anticipates activity for 60 days or longer, he should not put them into status. If he anticipates he's going to continue working on them, he should not put them into status.
Okay, I agree with that.
You may be working on them through the spring or into summer or something, so.
Yeah, we
Premature.
would rather wait and just
What should
till we
we do?
finally get to the point and then make the
Makes
request to the commission.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So Tony, if we
Okay,
look,
I'm satisfied with that.
can you go back to the other one for just a minute, please? I'm sorry.
Right there.
So Tony, if we look at the left side of this table, less than 60 days, which of those wells, we know the top two and the bottom two are currently in production, are currently drilling. There are 5 in the middle, there's 4 green and the 1 blue. Are those currently in shut-in status as are already approved by the board? Or are you asking for it?
I'm asking for it on
Thank
those
you. That's
5, in
what I'm
addition
looking
to the 31 and the 32, yes.
Okay, so we've done the 31 and 32, they've been approved. We've approved the 3 top for temporarily abandoned. So we're down to those 4 green and 1 blue ones, correct?
The 4 green, for clarification, they were previous producers, which we have suspended production on them until we get some more production to start back up the plant. And the 28-1 is a well that hasn't previously produced, but Navajo Springs, sorry, 28-1 Navajo Springs. It is shut in also. It has had a well completion report filed on it,
That gets shut.
but it has not produced before. It's waiting on pipeline.
Just to
That
clarify.
was my question next, Tony. Are all of these, now you have submitted completion reports on
Yes.
all of those?
Yes.
So they do qualify for shut-in status?
That's it.
Okay. This is Frank Thorwald. I'm making a motion that we give shut-in status to Ranger 2-1 MD, Ranger 34-1 PD, Ranger 34-2 PD, Ranger 31-1 NS, and Ranger 28-1 NS for a period of,
How long? What, 5 years?
I recommend 5 years.
5 years.
It makes it more convenient for y'all. We hope to get them back on this year, so. that's,
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any abstentions? Any nays? Hearing none, the motion carries.
I'd like to make a comment now.
Go ahead.
I want to compliment Tony and Dennis for doing such a great job in organizing this information, which could have been a mess if it wasn't organized like it is.
Okay. Very fine.
Thank you.
We have 4 additional wells here to deal with.
But they're currently in production, so they don't match. Because
They're currently drilling or completion.
currently drilling, so they're less than 60 days.
I believe that he's adequately reported on those wells. I put them there because I wasn't sure if there was a need for the commission to make a decision on them, but they're still actively working on those wells. That's why they're in the column for less than 60 days. And as long as they continue to work on them, there's nothing that the commission needs to consider. It was just an update.
Any additional questions or discussions by the commissioners?
I'd like to make one other comment, Mr. Dale.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
I think we've learned a lesson here that, that this kind of an approach to the exploration for the Shinnerup conglomerate has been successful with the number of wells that have encountered helium and are currently shut in. That doesn't mean they will ultimately be all producers, but it shows the success of this particular approach geologically.
Any other discussion before we move on?
Mr. Chair, in the agenda, we have also 15-1 OSA draw expired, 9-1 PDS expired. They're not on the handout to us. I just want to make sure that there's nothing we have to do involving those as we sit here today.
Correct. For the sake of completeness, I put them on there just so that the commission understands that there's a peck of wells that Ranger's been active on the last 3 years, and the status of the 4 on the bottom there don't need any action, but just for reference to make a complete picture for y'all.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to item B, retroactive confidentiality.
I'd like to explain a couple of things here before we start the discussion. Retroactive confidentiality and then item 4 immediately below it, unproven territory, are intertwined. And I'm not sure which should come first. Don't want to put the cart before the horse, chicken and egg, whatever. Ranger is asking for confidentiality in the context of Shinnerup conglomerate formation being unproven territory. The commission has not had the benefit of the discussion that Dr. Nations, Mr. Zeiss, and I had with Mr. Hines about 2 weeks ago in regards to unproven territory. For the Shinnerup, even though they are drilling and attempting to produce in an established field called the Pintadome field, but in the past, Pintadome was known for production in the Coconino. I'm asking the commission that maybe consider an official interpretation that we can adopt as to how we want to approach unproven territory, and then from there, that gives the context for why Mr. Hines is asking for confidentiality. But I'd say also that there's some question about, as I call it, retroactive. I'm not sure which agenda item ought to be approached first. Do you want to discuss about just the concept of unproven territory and get that cleared out of the way so that we know what we're talking about when we talk about Mr. Hines' requests?
I think we need to qualify for everybody what the accepted definition of unproven territory is.
Okay, so that'd be item 4 on the agenda first.
We can take things out of order in the agenda.
Yeah. I put it this way on the paper because it was related to Ranger, and it's a broader issue with unproven territory. It would look really weird to just insert it in the middle there. So.
Yeah, I have an opinion. I actually stated it in an earlier meeting that
Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
the fact that the state that there is no definition in the rules or the statutes of unproven territory leaves it to the discretion of the commission on any given proposal of exploration to decide whether it's unproven or not. And in this case, because Ranger came in with a very specific proposed exploration plan, which was very different than drilling into just the Coconino sandstone, then I think that justifies that as being considered unproven. And I think that would have to be decided on if somebody else, some other company comes in with a very different plan of exploration. So I don't think we need to define unproven except for a particular case such as this one.
Unproven meaning that there's been no production in that vicinity.
Yeah, in that unit, that the Shinnerup conglomerate.
Yeah.
Now there has been production in that vicinity. Yeah, from the Coconino, which is a very different geological objective. What's unproven was whether or not the company could trace the Shinnerup stream channel system, and with the information they had, and it's proven, like I said earlier, to be pretty successful.
Dr. Nations, if I may comment, during our discussion, you brought home a very important point. And that is that we have to, my consideration as council is we have to look at the formations in which we are seeing exploration as more of a 3D analysis than either a superficial analysis. And in considering if something's unproven or not, we should not only look at the overlying structure, but at which depth they're going to, because in my looking at it, assuming there is a helium-producing formation, say the Shinnerup, and someone comes forward and says, but I want to drill into the Supai to see if I can find helium there, to me, the commission should look at if anybody else has gone to the Supai in the region to determine if it's proven or unproven. And so rather than look at it as a superficial model, it should be 3D, depending on not only surface but on the extent out laterally and vertically, and what formation someone's drilling in. I know that doesn't provide a definition, but I think it provides something of an outline to consider unproven. And just for everybody's information, Dennis and I spent quite a lot of time looking for a definition of unproven territory, and we have yet to find a definition somewhere, and including within our own rules, our own statutes, and then Dennis went into some of his information available, and it is currently, to our understanding, an undefined term, subject to a reasonable interpretation by this commission.
I would point out that the one thing that has been out there is that unproven territory is an area of non-production. But again, I can concur with everything you've said, Mr. Zeiss, with regard to the area, surface area, and the depth, because it certainly could be totally different areas in that. Commissioners,
Question?
please, Mr. Farber.
Okay.
Mr. Farber.
Just to be real clear, what are the consequences of declaring it unproven? That has to have some consequences.
The consequence has to do with confidentiality, which is the reason we took this before we talked about Ranger's next concept of confidentiality and racial confidentiality.
Okay.
If a operator drills into a proven formation and comes up with data, that data it has no confidentiality because it's in a quote-unquote proven territory. Unproven allows them to make a request for confidentiality, and from my reading of rule and statute, the purpose of the confidentiality is to protect someone's financial investment in drilling into a previously unexplored area. Otherwise, if an operator takes on the risk of drilling in an unproven area, finds a pocket or finds an asset, whether it's helium or whatever, and that becomes public, he doesn't get the benefit of, he or she or company does not get the benefit of an investment of drilling into that area, because that information now becomes public, and his competitors likewise could take that information, drill into the same formation, maybe at one lease over, and the original party loses the benefit of the investment.
And for how long a period of time are we going to protect that information?
Dennis, I believe it's 1 year.
Okay, so the rule says automatically an operator is granted 1 year in unproven territory. The operator can come back to the commission and request an extension from 6 months to up to 2 years after that 1 year.
So it could be a total of 3 years.
Could be, is the way
1
I
year
understand.
plus 2 year extension.
I don't think, maybe it needs a read from an attorney, but I don't see that it says you can ask for any more confidentiality after that 3rd year is expired.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
So,
Any other discussion? Hearing none, let's move back to
Well, before we move back, is there a determination by the board as to how we are going to define unproven territory? And one suggestion is to, the board may take it up individually as the need arises, on a noticed motion, or on a noticed agenda item, and certainly Tony or their operator can make request upon Dennis for a determination if there's some question. I have somewhat reluctance of a defined term unproven territory currently, given the status of our Dennis and my looking through different records or different interpretations. That's my suggestion, is to not provide a specific current definition, subject to the board reviewing facts, keeping in mind its application in the past.
the other alternative certainly would be to define it, for us to set a definition where it's for particular, specify for oil production of oil or gas or other helium or whatever, and have it defined the area immediately surrounding it and the formations below. If it's not producing in those areas, then it's unproven. What do the commissioners think?
Case
Yeah,
by case.
I think that we're beating a dead horse. I think let's just leave this undefined to be determined by the commission on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, case by case to me is best.
So just for right now then, we could table this, leave it as it is, because that's our current methodology, is case by case, not defined, and move on to the next agenda item, which would be to go back and talk about confidentiality. I'm suggesting that to you.
Mr. Hines had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest in the future, as far as when you do these case by case or whatever, you also consider unproven can also be technical applications or technical practices. Moving into unproven territory, i.e. types of works, the way you perforate, the type of guns or type of stimulations, that can also be unproven territory or is unproven territory. Also,
the
Just
technology
for
to
consideration.
look at formations.
Yes.
Obviously, in the 70s, they determined that many of these areas were exhausted, and with the new technology, you could find separate domes within there. Does all the commissioners agree on that?
Well, I think we do need to make a decision on whether we're going to grant this confidentiality.
Well,
This particular-
excuse me, Commissioner Nations, I agree with you. I'm going to come back to that. I just want to make sure everybody agrees that we do this on a case-by-case basis first. Is anybody opposed to that? I don't think we need a vote on this.
You can do either, you can table it.
I think we can just table this and look at it in the future. Hearing no other, is there any other discussion?
Yeah, you're not tabling the request for confidentiality in
No,
this case.
I'm only tabling the discussion of item 4, the discussion of
Yeah.
what
The
the definition
philosophical.
is of unproven territory.
Yeah, the philosophical question.
Right.
Yes.
Let us go back to item 3B, the retroactive confidentiality. With respect to that, do we have any other discussions before we get a motion?
Actually, let's go back to that one, if you could provide a little more background, either
We need to
Dennis
discuss this, yeah.
or either Mr. Turner or Mr. Hines provide a little more background. I understand we discussed unproven territory, however, I'd like the board to be apprised of the facts surrounding the request for retroactive confidentiality for some well data from Ranger Development.
Mr. Hines? Go ahead.
Yep. So I made a request specifically for the 28-1 NS well, and I also included in the same letter a request for the retroactive or to open up the discussion about retroactive confidentiality on some information for the remainder of the Ranger wells with regard to the Shinran formation. The first part of the request for the 28-1, at the time the request was made, we were still within the 1 year confidentiality. And now that but obviously presuming that it's in unproven territory. We consider it to be unproven territory because the Shinran hadn't been developed. We've gone through the efforts of getting, stimulation permits, of getting 40-acre spacing, and so we consider we're definitely in our opinion, unproven territory, and request that the 28-1 NS information be continued to be held confidential for an additional 2 years over the original 1 year period. So that's the first part of the request in the letter.
And Tony, that's pursuant to our 12.7.121C1, I believe is the proper.
Yes.
Thank you. That's it for both, unless there's more comments.
Any discussion?
Well, I think we should grant this, and I'm not sure how to formulate a motion to do it, because it seems to be rather complicated. We're talking about a letter that we haven't seen. It's been summarized to us by Tony, but I think we should recognize that we have already decided this is unproven territory because of the unique approach to the exploration and the development of the Shinnerump. So I move that we go ahead and grant these the confidentiality status that Ranger is requesting.
Commissioner Nations, Dennis.
Yeah, you shouldn't make a motion yet. As far as the 28-1NS, when I was first approached by that sounded like a fine request, and I recommend that approval. And since I've now learned the Commission's view on unproven territory for the Shinnerump, sounds perfectly logical to me. What I'm confused about or concerned about is that there are other wells that have been drilled over a year ago, I guess, that had part of the target was a Shinnerump, part of it was a Coconino, that were never requested in the past by Ranger to be confidential. But I understand you want at least some of those wells now declared confidential. I think they have technically been in the public record for this time. I'm quite confident that nobody has actually seen most of these wells unless they made a public records request for a specific well. I would ask legal counsel to make that interpretation. From my training in public records keeping is that once you put something in the public record, you can't retroactively declare it as confidential after it's been in the records. It's sort of like unringing a bell, but I'm not an expert in public records law, so that's just based on my training. So I want the Commission to consider Ranger's request if they want to pretty much declare all of your Ranger wells or just your Ranger wells that are in the 40-acre spacing targeting the Shinnerump to be confidential. That's another part I'm not clear on. Do you want both? Do you want all Ranger wells confidential data, or are you just interested in the Shinnerump drilled wells?
Yeah, in reading through the rule, once this issue came up on the deal, specifically referencing back again the 121C number 1, the first part of it says the Commission will keep information unproven, confidential for a year. Then it says that 60 days prior to it becoming made to the public, the operator would be given notice that it's getting ready to be put out in the public domain. Then after that, at that point, it says the operator has, at their request, has the right to get an extension of the confidential period for up to 2 years. So knowing that all of our wells, some of them have Coconino production, but they also have Shinnerump production and information relating to the Shinnerump, the only thing we feel like we could possibly request, not that you're going to grant it, but could possibly request is for any request during the next 2 years, that's what we're asking for, not give out information related to the Shinnerump. We don't know what's been given out. We don't, none of us can probably go back and do that. All we can ask, I think, at this point is don't give out any more on the Shinnerump for at least the next 2 years, and we just hope for the best on that. Whatever's out in the public, you can't take back. We agree with that. But we don't even know what's out in the public at this point, personally, because they haven't done a search on the public. So it is it's a pretty cloudy request, but I think that, the request is just if somebody calls up saying they're wanting information on the Shinnerump for our wells for at least the next 2 years, that we be granted the confidentiality on the Shinnerump sections, and not, of course, we're not asking it on the Coconino because that is proven territory. I'm not sure if that's possible, but
so you could do it on a well by well basis, but I remember also you came and presented your geologic ideas on the Shinnerump, and we gave you sort of the discussion was a blanket discussion. Could we make this motion in terms of a blanket thing instead of individual drill holes?
Commissioner Farburn, I had a similar thought, and I certainly will want to bring counsel in on this, but if we made some type of motion that said we would give confidentiality extension on Ranger wells going into the Shinneram for 2 years, could we do that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
One of the issues right now that I have is I've looked at the agenda, and there's only one well up for determination of confidentiality from my reading, and that's the 28-1 Navajo Springs. I know there are other ones. My concern is we don't have specific wells identified, and to provide a confidentiality blanket without a specification of wells, I think is a...
That's not specified here in the
I know, and that's my difficulty.
I mean, there is no 28-1, it's just retroactive confidentiality in general.
Then I'm not sure we can even, my concern is that we don't, the board or the commission has insufficient information as to which wells it would affect, which well, and the basis of confidentiality on those wells. My suggestion is that a couple of thoughts. One is you could place a short-term hold on all information within a specific development such as Shinneram, so that someone making a public records request would have to go through Dennis. Do that for 6 weeks until the next meeting, until you provide sufficient information. So we hold a status quo basically before you have a chance, because certainly Ranger has invested a lot of time and money. I would rather not grant a confidentiality today without identification of specific wells or specific formations. I would rather hold status quo for 6 weeks, allow it to come up on the next calendar on our next vote, on our next meeting, so that we have identification of wells and formations. And my thought is, as much as I'm trying to be fair to Ranger, I have to be fair to every other operator in the field, and certainly everybody is entitled to the protection or the motivation to continue drill, either way. That's my suggestion, is to somewhat put a hold for the next 6 weeks on release of information without a determination of confidentiality, and then we take it up in 6 weeks with specific wells or specific formations. And if you want to group wells around formations, certainly we can do a very similar table and matrix as we did today. I understand it's extra work. However, our goal is to ensure that you get confidentiality where you're entitled to. But if you're not entitled to it and we have other operators in the field, my belief is they should be given every opportunity to. And with that, I will turn it back to Commissioner.
Commissioners, Commissioner Parker.
Sorry, so, okay. So who, is confidentiality granted by the board, or can Dennis do it as a matter of course?
The board.
I believe it's by the board. The first one, let me read back through. The first one may be automatic.
The first one's automatic from my understanding.
It's automatic first.
The second one would be by the board.
It has to be by the board.
So unfortunately, or fortunate or unfortunate, they're going to have to come before us basically on every well or group of wells, and we grant
Yes.
that. That's the process.
I hate, yes, Commissioner Cooper?
Well, we aren't reading the rest of the rule. Basically, the operator has to provide credible evidence that the disclosure of the information is likely to harm the operator's competitive position with respect to unleased land in the vicinity of the well. And I don't know, do you have competitors in your vicinity out there?
There is unleased land in the area.
Okay.
On that. We don't know, how many are looking at it or not looking at it. That information has also been, I'm sure, probably presented at one point in time, but it's not current.
Okay, and then just so we're clear, what information are you providing to us that this would harm your competitive position?
That is a good question as to what would be required when it comes to this. I mean, it's obvious, everybody knows we've invested a lot of money in the area, gained a lot of knowledge, and that in itself, with all the information we provided, would, I guess, theoretically be the information we provided, say it's going to provide us an unfair advantage if somebody gets to use our money to go further their economic investment by being able to use it.
Okay. Perhaps Mr. Zeiss's recommendation that maybe we, short term, basically table this item so that you can provide that evidence, and I would also like to see that from the other prior formations, the new, what new activities you're doing in different, drilling zones, which I'm inclined to say that that is a good argument for basically unproven territory, if that's, that's the key of what you're seeking to protect, rather than just trying to get a blanket confidentiality. The board may give you the entirety of it, but I would also like to know basically what's new out there that is really confidential versus what's already been disclosed to the public.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I have an opinion.
Commissioner Nations, go ahead.
I'm thinking each of the wells that Ranger drills on this project, this plan of exploration, could either lead to an extension of their objectives into unleased land or not. In other words, if they find helium, then that's good. If they don't find it, they'd prefer probably to not let that be out either, because that helps to some other operator to make interpretations about the value of unleased land adjacent to these operations. I don't know what I just said. So.
I totally agree with it.
Whatever it was.
Let me ask.
I understood it.
Let me ask council: can we put a hold on the release of information till our next meeting, and have at the next meeting detailed information from Ranger with regard to each one of the wells and the specific information that Commissioner Cooper has requested?
It's not provided for by statute or rule that I've seen, at least within oil and gas. However, I think in the best interest of this board and in the best interest of not only Ranger but other developers, in their best interest of the state, I believe that a 6-week hold would be reasonable. And I believe you could do it.
What does that mean?
Then let me make a motion.
In other words, you're not going to allow any information out for the Ranger if someone makes a request for 6 weeks, pending Ranger coming back in with a matrix with sufficient information. And we don't necessarily have to go well by well if we have a group of wells in the same area, similar to what we did today. But my goal is to protect the financial investment of Ranger for a period of 6 weeks. At the same time, I know there are operators out there up in the Holbrook Basin that if they see an economic advantage, they will take advantage of it quickly. My goal is to hold status quo for 6 weeks, pending the next meeting of this board or this commission. And at that point, we make a determination. But yes, I think from a protection of the best interest of the state and best interest of the parties involved, a 6-week hold on release of information would be appropriate.
And just to inform the board, I have had a public records request by a competitor for another operator's records, although he stipulated that obviously he understood that if it was still within the confidentiality period, he wanted to get access to it. And I spoke to the other operator, and they don't desire to extend their confidentiality. So I don't know if I should be naming who they are. We'll just say Company A has asked for Company B's records if they're not confidential. Company B's records are confidential until about the middle of May, at which point if Company A wants to come back and ask, then they can have those records. So that kind of thing is going on out there now, where one competitor is asking for records of another.
Let me get back to this. I would like to make a motion that we temporarily keep Ranger's information confidential till our next meeting, at which time we rule upon the confidentiality status of Ranger based upon the information that will be provided at the time.
Second.
All in favor of any discussion? All in favor of that motion?
Yeah, I'm a little confused about all of that, but
okay.
I agree with that we could take that position. I'm wondering about where Rick, is that just a policy that you're stating now?
That is a policy, not necessarily a policy as much as a suggestion to this board in the best interest of the board. so that we don't do damage to either ranger or we don't do damage to an operator out there seeking information.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That, you know, it would not behoove the state of Arizona to limit other companies' opportunities to lease land to develop helium or oil and gas. So we don't want to be too restrictive on it. So I agree with you.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to not give out, temporarily not give out any information on Rangers, from Rangers developments for the next 6 weeks until we have our next meeting, and which time we would decide on confidentiality. And we have a second on that. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, just one brief comment. I do think as our mission as on the commission is to basically further this industry and to make it work. And if an operator who's willing to put money on the table and invest in it feels like they have no right to any secrecy or proprietary information, we are not meeting our obligation or our charge to try to develop and protect the industry. So that's the reason that I would be supporting your motion, Mr. Chair.
I thank you, Commissioner Cooper, and I agree with that statement. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of this motion say aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries.
One last comment. If I could make request upon Mr. Hines to contact and work with Mr. Turner in regards to developing an informational matrix for the board, I think it would make it a much more enlightening experience next time, and it would probably accelerate somewhat the approval or disapproval process.
Will do. Thank you.
Moving on to item 5, report by the Administrative Council. Mr. Zeiss, Council Zeiss, can you? This is on
The jurisdictional issues?
jurisdictional
I think
issue.
that was supposed to come off calendar. I think we discussed that last time.
Okay, is there anything to add to it?
Other than what we said before in regards to the difficulties of dealing with permitting process on what's considered state land, the O'Neill lands, the Hopi lands, the Navajo lands, and the interaction. One of the difficulties before, if you remember, was that the federal government, the National Park Service, attempted to expand boundaries of the petrified forest. However, as of yet, they have not completed purchase of the lands and the rights and a group of rights to the western edge or the western section. That's where some of our difficulty has been. Other than that, I think we discussed it last time. I'm not sure we have to move on with it this time.
Okay.
Dennis?
So I have a comment. I actually left it on the agenda thinking that at least the commission needs to know that there is another operator that stepped forward and expressed their interest in applying for a permit on the western expansion of the petrified forest. And I just thought you guys ought to know that. I haven't gotten an application yet, but the operators talked to me informally about doing something.
And that's the similar problem we had in the past with Pollard exploration, right, and their difficulties in dealing with the National Park Service. So, and if I just for a quick review, we issued them a secondary provisional permit,
pending them getting the necessary permits from the Petrified National Forest.
Council's Eyes, just for my help my memory, have we been able to make, since that particular land has not been actually purchased by the federal government, why is it that the state of Arizona does not have authority in making decisions on that land?
As of right now, from my recollection of Pollard, is the National Park Service has said you have to come to us for approval. The discussion would require us to make contact with the National Park Service, which may prove additional litigation, additional steps. I'm not sure of the outcome. I have no authority to move in that area currently, and that's the difficulty. So because we have two competing interests, the federal government and the state of Arizona, we give our approval for the state rights. The federal rights, if there are any, is up to the operator to either meet those requirements of the Park Service and the federal government, or challenge the requirements of the federal government and the Park Service, rather than the state of Arizona or the Oil and Gas Commission.
I would like to throw this out to the other commissioners. It seems to me that we may be shirking our duty here if we do not clarify this, because this is not something that's lasted for a few weeks or a few months. This has been an ongoing thing for many years, and without clarification, I think there's certainly an ongoing problem. Commissioners, do any of you have any thoughts on this?
Well, one suggestion right now is it's a discussion item, not a vote item.
Mm-hmm.
One thought would be, let's place it for further discussion on the next, with an indication of not only discussion but vote to move forward in one manner or another.
Okay, that sounds fine with me. Let's move on to, is there any other discussion on this? Hearing none, let's move on to item 6, report by the Oil and Gas Administrator. Dennis?
So the third and final Top Corp short course training is coming up for me on the dates shown, May 13th through the 17th, 2019. There is, as the previous two short courses have been, there's a considerable amount of online pre-course training that I have to go through. And then I will be out of the office away during that week of the 13th of May. The subject of this that's coming up on the 13th of May is petroleum geology and petroleum engineering for oil and gas inspectors. And from talking to other participants that have taken the course already, or talking to people that are running the course, this is probably the best of the three. It'll be the most beneficial to me in terms of my training. And then after I complete that, I graduate, if you will, from their training. There's a 3-segment thing. This is the third one. In regards to Enterprise Adamana,
Dennis, I have a question.
yeah.
Go ahead.
If I may go back to that item, Top Corp. We've got an issue coming up later on in this meeting about whether certain persons such as yourself should be granted authority to carry out the rules and regulations of the organization to which they're assigned. Is there ever any discussion at these Top Corp meetings about how that question would be approached by different states?
No, the purpose of Top Corp training is purely technical. I have an opportunity to network with other coworkers from the other states, other inspectors, and I sometimes ask them those kinds of questions just to compare notes with how other states operate. But it's not something where there's a formal presentation by somebody in Top Corp to talk about what other states do, or if there's a blanket.
Yeah, but one of the reasons of this Top Corp program is to prepare geologists or engineers to function with the authority to regulate and enforce rules and regulations.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they're being trained to do that.
Yeah.
Dr. Nations, I made comment, though, that one of the difficulties we're going to run into, and you'll see as we discuss, is that each state's going to have different rules and regulations for its staff or its administrator that may affect directly on whether that administrator and what type of decision-making process is available. But with that, I will leave it to our executive discussion.
All right.
Okay.
And then as far as Enterprise Adamana facility, I will be bringing before the commission in a future meeting a request for approval by Adamana for the shut-in status of 2 injection wells, as they would be called in the rule. There are at Adamana 12 caverns. 2 of the wells at these caverns, 2 caverns in other words, are shut in. That is, they're not using the caverns for storage of LPG underground. And apparently they've been in shut-in status for a considerable length of time, as in years. It's only recently have I begun to really understand the context of what's going on out there, in part because the previous manager of the operation didn't give me a high level of comfort in some areas, and the communication wasn't all that great. But I've had a conversation with the senior technical advisor nationwide for enterprise products, and he indicates that they're very interested in complying with the rules and regulations of this state. He wants to appear before the board also to make a presentation to request a change in the workover frequency, very similar to what Plains Midstream did for the Bumstead facility out near Luke Air Force Base a couple of months ago. So I'd say that right now, probably a future agenda item would be request for shut-in stats for 2 of their wells, and he'll present the reasons why and the beneficial use. And also, he's going to make a presentation, a request for changing the workover status, which they've been operating as workover, and MIT tests are done on 5-year intervals. So
I have a question.
that's coming up.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nations.
Dennis, shut-in status of an underground storage well, does that mean that they're filled with brine?
Yes, they are now.
Uh-huh. So there's no product in there, just brine?
Correct.
Okay.
So at the second bullet there, 182, I need to get back out there and do a safety inspection. And I'll make that a segue that frankly between now and the 24th of May, I would like to get some face time in the field looking at rare earths operations, Pollard's operations, Rangers operations, and Adamana. If I can structure my schedule such I can do that, I intend to be out in the field a fair bit between now and May 24th. I want to alert the commission that the Tucson sample storage has a lot of room thanks to Niall Nemeth efforts for inventorying and our clearing out space. I think I showed you some pictures over a year ago. ADQ Watershed Protection Program had need for a small use of space, which I provided in a memo that I gave you guys, photographs of what it looks like. It's a very tidy area. Dr. Nations has actually seen it. What it is one of the ADQ employees does sampling of stormwater runoff into the Babakari drainage on the San Pedro River. They incubate these samples in a little oven that you saw in the illustration. Incubate as opposed, it's not really an oven with much heat. In fact, the interior temperature of that oven is less than what Phoenix gets in the summertime. It's like 37 degrees or 35 degrees Celsius. You can get to 40 degrees Celsius here in Arizona, in Phoenix, in the summer. And then those samples, he just counts the ones that have changed color, and they're put into a plastic bag and sealed and transferred to Phoenix for disposal up here. There is a basin, a little drainage basin in the sink, basically, in the sample storage room where we have down there. But he doesn't use it to dump the samples down there. I don't know what that basin is doing there anymore. There's still running water in it, but that's not where the samples are disposed of. So I just want to let the commission know that there's a small area that's being used, and it's not crowding out our samples. We've got lots of room left for samples. So that was just an FYI. Another FYI, as I understand that the governor's office has issued a cloud-first policy. How this will affect the commission at a minimum is that our oil and gas viewer will go to the cloud. This is to increase availability by the public, I guess, to public records. It's also going to enable ADQ, since it's managing the GIS viewer, to install the better quality or latest GIS technology that you can use on the viewer. I've had a chance to go through a trial process and use the viewer, and it has some different features for searching that are better than the ones we have now. But it's possible that the entire website will go to the cloud. I don't know if that's been decided.
Dennis, I'll mention more of that under my section and elaborate on that.
I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. But the due date for that, statewide, it's not just applying to the Oil and Gas Commission. The due date for that is June 30th, 2020. And I believe that's it for my report.
Any questions for the administrator? Hearing none, let's move on to item 7, report by the chairman. I met with at his request, the head of the air department here at DEQ this week, and he had coordinated that meeting with the administrator. And the purpose of the meeting was to discuss the legislative activities, the funding, so forth, for the commission, and how we could work together in utilizing this and moving forward in the planning for the additional funds. The discussion was with regard to the website and to the cloud and how to update that and change the software to make that work more effective, to work with DEQ, looking up the well sites and all of the other things, how we can do registration, filings and so forth over the internet, and have that all set up in place. In addition to that, so having our website separate from DEQ's website, but being able to have application processes in a menu-driven format, so that if you apply for this, then here's the permits you have to get from whatever source, and that would include DEQ as well as us, and have that on our site, and then have DEQ have a similar thing on their site, where somebody's applying for a DEQ thing, permit, and have oil and gas in there as well as additional support for Dennis to be able to move these things along. So, very congenial meeting. They certainly, the director and the head of our air quality certainly wants to make this as smooth as possible and provide us with whatever we need with regard to these types of things. So that's what I wanted to report on that. Other than that, I don't see any legislative. Well, that comes in number 8, but that would be it from my point at this time. Any questions? Okay. Moving on to 8, legislation affecting the Oil and Gas Commission. I don't see anything that's other than the governor's report. We're moving into the cloud that currently affects the commission. Is anybody aware of anything that may have missed? Okay. Moving on to the next item, call to the public. Is there anybody that would like to speak? Mr. Hines, you had your hand up first.
It's Tony Hines with Ranger Development. We would like
you have 3 minutes.
We would like the commission to review Rule 125D and clarify that works as referenced there on, it says that an operator shall ensure that no work begins on a temporarily abandoned or shut-in well until approved by the commission. That you define that turning a well back on that's been shut in just from producing does not constitute work, so that we don't need to come back to the commission and ask to get our turn our wells back on. Just for clarification on that. And then in several of the rules, just the comment for the commission to consider, and I think y'all are already going to do that, to review things that would help, that would give more power to the administrator to actually make the judgments, subject to, providing information, but those, for him to make the decision, come on, temporary abandoned, shut in, so that we don't take up the commission's time on the agendas on some of the mundane, simpler things. And I know that's gray, but that's just general comment.
I won't take
Come on.
This is
Introduce yourself.
This is Jim Ballard, interested citizen, and I just want to make a couple comments. I certainly want to express support for helium development and Ranger's efforts to progress along that in the field of Pinto Dome, etc. I do want to say, I think, in my opinion, that the concept of the recompletions in the Shinnerup do constitute unproven territory from the beginning. It was a concept I think that would apply even though it was basically a recompletion or a redevelopment program. I would say that I think confidentiality is probably very important and would be appropriate. One possible stumbling block might be that some of the wells are even past 3 years from when they were drilled, so I'm not sure that would be applicable anyway. So do whatever we can to keep things confidential, but of course follow the limit on confidentiality that's in the statutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, let's move on to the next item, review and consideration of future agenda items. I think we've already talked about some of those. Is there any other ones that the commissioners would like to have?
I'm sorry about beating the dead horse, but I think we've got to relate somehow get the commission up to date in the regulations and statutes that we're living by, and I think this Attorney General opinion 60-39 is something that just is not binding on the commission, and if we need to have that as an agenda item to discuss in the future, I'd like to request that. How we go about requesting an updated opinion that applies to the way that the commission is staffed and operating now.
I think we'll be discussing that shortly.
Yeah, I know we will, but I'm just asking that it be put on the agenda, a future agenda, for the request of an updated opinion from the Attorney General relative to the current status and responsibilities of the commission as it exists now.
Okay. Any additional items for 10? Okay, moving on to item 11, announcements. Is there any announcements? Hearing no announcements, we move on to executive session. Do I have a motion to move that we move into executive session?